just because a bunch of people on the red team are going to lie about it and caricature it. And I'd ask that you not adopt their language.
Democratic Congressman Sean Maloney shut down crap from Brian Williams during an MSNBC segment. Now, this is fantastic. And Sean Maloney is somebody who isn't even really, at least on paper, all that progressive or representative of the working class. He is very moderate in his positions, but he does a fantastic job here shutting down the crap coming out of Brian Williams about defund the police. Watch this.
Are Democrats ready to own how much damage defund the police did as a phrase, as a movement, to races all over the country and to candidates and incumbents that had nothing to do with it?
Well, I mean, let's be careful. First of all, the Democratic House majority is not, responsible for that rhetoric. In fact, no one's responsible except the Minneapolis police officer who murdered George Floyd. And a lot of people thought that was wrong and were right to point out the historic and systemic problem with racism in America. And I think that caring about racism counts to a lot of my neighbors, even in a Trump district. And of course, we're going to support good police. Mm-hmm. But because there are voices that call for things that we don't support, or because our Republican opponents want to lie and caricature that, and we should not confuse that with what we support. So if it falls on us to get what we actually believe in out better, that's fair. But don't blame us because they're lying about what we stand for. My goodness. The fact of the matter is that we held control of the House. And there are many things that we can do better, Lord knows, in the digital area, in organizing in the community, in addressing the complexities of the many Latino communities that differ in South Florida or the Rio Grande Valley or New York, California. And yes, the Justice and Policing Act, named after George Floyd, is a good piece of legislation. I was proud to support it in my Trump district. I won by double digits for the third time in a row. That's a tall order as a gay guy. And I think we can communicate and win and stand for something. So I'm not going to run away from trying to change what's wrong in America just because a bunch of people on the red team are going to lie about it and caricature it. And I'd ask that you not adopt their language.
I know. I was asking because it had been affixed to candidates who had nothing to do with the messaging, and some of them very little to do with the movement.
Look how quickly Brian Williams retreats, because he has no information to actually back up what he is saying. The only reason it was affixed to certain Democratic candidates or to Democrats in general is because the media claims that it was. The reality is Democrats that actually backed defund the police, like Cori Bush, won their district in massive numbers. No other Democrats really ran on that, except for Cori Bush and maybe Jamal Bowman, who also won his district. So this idea that defund the police hurt Democrats, there's no data, no information at all to back that up. And in fact, an NBC News report, which he may have been able to reference here, completely contradicts what he just said there. Now, Sean Maloney, I'll get to him in a second. He did a good job as well. But let me these are some other questions that Brian Williams could have led with that are actually based in facts. Are Democrats ready to own that every congressperson that backed Medicare for All won their race? Because that's true. Every single congressperson that backs Medicare for All won their race. Why didn't he lead with that question? Because they have an agenda to push. Are Democrats ready to own that socialism is historically popular? Again, this is fact. Why didn't he lead with that? Because again, they have a certain pro-corporate agenda to push. Are Democrats ready to own that AOC regularly outraises Nancy Pelosi in fundraising without relying on corporate money? Meaning that Democrats may not need, definitely don't need, corporate money to keep their campaigns going. But no, again, he's not going to lead with that question because he works for a massive corporation. They have a certain agenda to push. The framing around these questions is everything. Most Democrats would fall apart under this question and would just give in to the framing. Sean Maloney here, to his credit, even though he's a moderate, pushes back and completely exposes the BS that Brian Williams is pushing there. Again, no Democrats ran, except for maybe Cori Bush, maybe Jamal Bowman, maybe AOC, ran on defund the police. And they all won their races. So The idea that you can pin an activist label to Democrats and somehow blame Democrats for what? Not running on that slogan, even though you're claiming that they like. I don't even know what what has Brian Williams tried to get out of this. That how can you pin a label to people who did not run on that label? But again, the only thing Sean Maloney really misses here is that he could have pushed back completely and done just a complete 180 on what Brian Williams said, as data shows us that, in fact, Black Lives Matter and that protest movement helped Democrats. Not hurt, helped Democrats. All the data shows that. Again, if Brian Williams presented any piece of evidence at all he says is, oh, they ran commercials. They ran commercials attacking Democrats for supporting defund the police. Does that mean that that is the reason that the Democrat lost? Or did they lose for some other reason? Again, a Democrat that whoever this Democrat he's talking about did not actually support defund the police. So just it is hilarious to try and blame Democrats for protest movements that have nothing to do with the Democratic Party. But again, let me show you what the data actually shows us. The appeal here. Some Texas elections suggest voters aren't afraid of defunding the police. None of the Austin City Council members who voted to cut police funding lost their elections. But a police union vice president who fearmongered about the defund movement did. What does that tell us? Why didn't Brian Williams bring this up? Because again, they have an agenda to push, and the framing of the questions is everything when it comes to pushing that agenda. NBC, he could have used his researchers, his own corporation, looked up this article from back in the summer. Voter registration surged during Black Lives Matter protests, study finds. The rise, largely among Democrats and independents, came after a steep decline amid the coronavirus pandemic. Notice how this is never brought up now. They brought this up at the time when it was happening in the summer, but they won't now reference this after the election because they would have to admit that actually the data shows us that Black Lives Matter helped Democrats. A lot more data here. Let me go through some graphs. This is from Tufts University. This one, coronavirus was the top issue for young Biden supporters, the economy for young Trump voters. So you see here, looking at what the percentage of young ages 18 to 29 supporters of each candidate who said each issue was their top issue in the 2020 election. So while coronavirus was the top for young Biden voters, racism was the second highest. This one, protests over police violence were an important factor in youth of color's vote choice. The percentage of youth ages 18 to 29 who named protests over police violence as the single most important factor determining their vote. You see here, black youth, 45% say protests over police violence were an important factor in their vote, and similar numbers across the board here. This one, young Biden voters much more likely to consider racism and policing a very serious issue. The percentage of young voters ages 18 to 29 for each candidate who expressed each level of concern about racism and policing. Youth who voted for Biden right here, 82% say that racism and policing is a very serious issue. Again, showing you the motivations behind these votes. This one, black youth in Georgia powered Joe Biden's run to flip the state. The percentage of Georgia voters in each group who voted for Joe Biden and for Donald Trump. You see right here who won Joe Biden the election. Black youth, ages 18 to 29. 90% voting with Joe Biden. And they say here if young voters had come out in smaller numbers, Biden's lead and chance to win the state would have also dwindled. We estimate that youth made up 20% of the Georgia electorate. If they had made up 17%, the national average, President Trump may have won the state. And last one here, young voters were critical to President-elect Biden's performance in key states. You see here Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and the amount of youth votes for Biden compared to Trump youth votes for Trump, much more or much higher youth turnout for Joe Biden, netting him victories here in states that were very close. So again, every piece of data shows us that not only did defund the police not hurt Democrats, it helped Democrats because it turned out a lot of young people. It registered a lot of Democrats and independents over the summer, and the turnout is clear. So whenever you see this idea pushed that defund the police hurt, First of all, acknowledge and understand that no Democrat, except for maybe a handful who won their races, actually ran on defund the police. But even apart from that, the Black Lives Matter movement helped Democrats. Every piece of data shows us this.